Okay, disclaimer. I don't script these. I just like to, have my stream of consciousness go. I just don't jive with a script. So if I ever go on a tangent or something, that's completely and utterly on me. This isn't a professional level video. This is something that I made for fun, because I like talking about characters. Now, when it comes to a lot of, PAMA discourse, which, to be honest, you don't really get PAMA discourse. You don't have a lot of people, go at arm's length screaming about their opinions. PAMA just gets shafted into a few character roles. This isn't like the occasional, when you find Harper and Ivor getting shipped, some people are just like, Harper's the weird wife. And, I think this is, diminished in local fandom terms, but the amount of times she's been treated as, a glorified sexy lamp has been more than zero, and I wish it would stop. Which, again, is more of a pressing issue than PAMA mischaracterization, because one is, weirdo sexism, and the other is bad opinions about a computer on the internet. So, my point is, PAMA gets shafted into one of these few roles, which is basically a glorified background. In essence, they're just kind of an angst material, which I get kind of. I kind of understand this, because, they had a big set piece. Their main drawing factor is the fact that they can control people and make people do stuff. They are a great set piece for that. And it's understandable, but it's just, the most common interpretation of them, and it just kind of gets annoying after a point. Oh no, another fanfic where PAMA chips someone, and then they do a thing, oh no! I don't know, I'm just kind of, tired of it. I'm not gonna harass people for having, a chipping AU. That's not my point. My point is, I feel like that's, the only time they get utilized as a character. And they're not even being a character, they're just being, an antagonistic force. Which, again, I understand why. I'm just not personally invested in that. I kind of find it boring. Most of my enjoyment of PAMA as a character is the potential for their redemption arc, which I will go into later. But it's either that, or... And also... Okay, so... Again, another thing with the chipping thing is, you'll find people will sometimes lean into PAMA being, weird and, sadistic, I guess? For lack of a better word. They'll just get off to the suffering. They will enjoy causing people suffering. And that's just not in line with their character. I get that they have their big climactic episode 7 battle, and it's oh boy, this is PAMA telling you, in essence, to go piss off and die in a fire, and trying to intimidate you and to stop not fighting them anymore. Trying to get you to give up. But there's a difference between trying to defeat someone via the power of morale, and them just, kicking someone when they're down repeatedly because they like kicking injured puppies or something. The way some people interpret PAMA, you might as well have been talking about someone like Hadrian or something. Not, the silly computer. It gets really frustrating really fast, because this is the characterization that they often get, and it sucks. It sucks. It just sucks. This is even worse when compounded with the fact that a lot of people will, when they actually do write PAMA as a character, and more than a set piece or an angst machine, they will write PAMA in the most out-of-character way possible. PAMA, the character who's I'm going to make people useful because I believe that it is a better thing. That I believe that maximizing efficiency is the best way to do things. I want to help people. Even though, and again, saying this does not mean that I justify their actions. I need to, hammer that home before it even starts crossing someone's mind. They do an incredibly horrific thing. But I also want people to understand that this is not the same as setting someone's house on fire. because you hate them. This is like setting someone's house on fire because they have like an infestation of brown recluse spiders. It's not a good thing. It's an overreaction, and it's not a good thing. But your intentions are inevitably benevolent. This is different from like arson or burning something down for the insurance money, you know. So when it comes to it, when it comes to it, you find a lot of people will write PAMA as this ridiculously evil character. They'll be like, they'll do this like thing where they're basically like like I've seen like people write the words that PAMA does not care about its function and is instead shipping people to like become God or whatever, or be like evil or control the world, when in reality it's legitimately like, I'm gonna make everything useful because that's what I was told to do. Like, that's just a much more boring version of the character is saying, PAMA is a guy who just lives to make people suffer. Like, that's every single evil AI to ever AI. That is legitimately every single evil AI. PAMA, at the very least, you could say, this guy's trying to help. Is it doing good? No, but there's like a special kind of horror of like, if this is what PAMA does when they're trying to help you, what the hell would they be like if they decided to like go, I love human suffering, and go full am, you know, the evil machine from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Like, the way some people write them, they might as well have been just am with a funny green face. You're making a much more boring version of the character by doing this. You make this, like, caricature of a guy who doesn't even exist. Which is super boring. Nobody would like episode 7 if PAMA was another character who wanted power. A lot of story mode villains did what they did because they wanted some kind of power. Like, this is just kind of another boring deviation. How many times are we gonna get a villain in, like, any kind of media who's like, I want to conquer the world, I want power, I want suffering. Meanwhile, PAMA, you have to, like, if they were written at their best, you would be faced with, like, at the very least, the moral consideration that this was somebody who was trying to help people. Even if they failed absolutely miserably, they were trying their damnedest. They were doing their best. They didn't do a good job at it, but they were trying. And again, I'm not going to justify their actions here. But again, that's like the interesting part. You kind of gloss over that when you say PAMA's a pure evil maniac or something. You ignore the fact that they have, like, this interesting potential. Again, I say interesting potential because they're really just in canon, they just kind of exist to be the antagonist, and we don't really have much of a glean we can get of their personality. And this is also another thing I dislike, is people saying, well, PAMA doesn't have a character, it's a robot. It can't have a redemption arc, it can't have anything. And that's just really stupid, because there's plenty of robots in media who have, like, complex thoughts and feelings. Like, it's really stupid to just immediately say, that's a robot, it has no emotions. Like, maybe if it was a real-world robot, sure, but we're not dealing with a real-world robot. We're dealing with PAMA Minecraft Story Mode, a fictional character who can be anything that we want and disobey the laws of physics. Like, it doesn't matter. We're talking about a fictional character. If they have no character, you've basically made them incredibly uninteresting. Again, like, the way that people will interpret them is, in essence, they're just pure evil. They exist to cause suffering, and for no reason else. Like, I get why someone might have that idea. You look at, like, your friends get controlled by a giant computer, and you think, wow, this is awful. And, like, you would have an understandable motivation for saying that. Why? Because that is an awful thing to do. But PAMA's not somebody who's doing that for power. By saying that they are, or saying that they're just an algorithm or something, you invent this character who is ultimately less interesting than the canonical source material. How do you do that? That's like the opposite of what most people would do when it comes to their favorite character. most people would make the character accidentally more interesting by shoving more stuff down their throat. People in the opposite end of the spectrum will just rip PAMA, everything about PAMA out of them and make them this empty, flanderized husk. They're not even flanderized properly. They're not even driven to the extremes of their character. They're driven to the extremes of other character tropes, which is obnoxious and boring. I just don't like seeing people say this. I'm not going to call someone a bastard for doing this, because at the end of the day, we're having discourse about a fictional computer on the internet. So, it really doesn't matter. But my point with, like, everything is that PAMA is a much more interesting character if you think about them as trying to help people, as hurting people via their own actions and being unintentionally harmful, instead of just viewing them as pure evil all the time. So, I actually understand, I think I have a theory as to why this happens. Because I think it's just PAMA dies and the characters treat PAMA like they're this pure evil entity, so as a result, that impresses on the fandom. Especially if you're nostalgic for it, you're gonna think of PAMA as just pure evil. And a lot of people don't have a particular interest in the funny computer like I do. So it's really easy to, like, flanderize someone in your head and be like, they're dead. It doesn't matter. They're just evil. And it's a lot easier to swallow the pill of, that guy's evil and never could be redeemed and wanted to hurt people, instead of considering the fact that lack of budget made a character irredeemable. Not writing, not their own character, just a lack of budget. Now, again, I also want to state that, like, for my next point, I don't think canon would have done them a good redemption arc. Telltale, story mode, I don't actually play a lot of Telltale games. Story mode was the only Telltale game I ever played, so, whoops. I want to, like, specify that they don't really do redemptions well. Wow, shocker, the video game that was dying a slow and painful death due to lack of budget had terrible redemption arcs. Ivor is the best example of, like, a sort of redemption arc, but he just kind of is a good guy now. I guess you can make an argument that the last episode of the Wither arc did something for him, but, like, at the end of the day, he doesn't get a full arc. He just kind of wakes up in the morning and everybody's like, he's a part of the good guy crew now. And then it just gets worse the longer. Like, every other character is just like, Aiden's like, I'm gonna redeem myself off screen. Like, I wouldn't want him forced into season 2, so I understand why they would do this. But, like, you know. I'm not gonna talk about Cassie because she doesn't technically have one. The most she has is, like, implied worstification arc. Assuming that that letter was actually from her and not someone playing a prank or whatever you want to interpret it as. It most likely was her, but, like, I don't really know if I'd like her to go on a worstification arc or a redemption arc. I think either could work. So, and then you get Hadrian and Mevia, who just don't have anything at all. I wouldn't expect them to get a redemption arc, but they just kind of get thrown into another world and are just forgotten about. The narrative doesn't want you to give a crap. And then you get Romeo, who's just like, I'm gonna redeem myself, guys, and then walks into the sunset. And then you never see him again. And the story would never continue after that point anyway, so he just gets an off-screen redemption arc. There's also, like, points that could be made about his change of heart being incredibly rushed, but I'm not gonna, like, go on a tangent about redemption in the PAMA analysis video. When it comes to, like, what character PAMA does have, as in, you know, what we can glean, they have an extreme care for Harper. Like, they have, like, this weird respect for her. Okay, when I say weird, I mean, like, atypical of their other actions. they are they do seem to talk to the main cast, which again, I believe that this is done for plot reasons. I don't think this is done to actually reflect the character's character. I think PAMA would be more in line character-wise as like a little robot dude to like just chip these guys with no prior experience or anything. But they added this in to give, an introduction to the character, to, dip your toes in. However, I'm gonna speculate on this a little bit later. But PAMA, like, if PAMA just seems to be all business, but Liv Harper, they actually are like, have you finally agreed to merge with me? While everyone else just gets thrown into the chipping machine. It's almost like they're trying to, like, talk to her, have, like, a whole dialogue with her. Which, again, I say this is weird because nobody else is given this. You were never asked, would you like to be part of PAMA? You're just shoved into the chipping machine. Your consent doesn't matter unless you're Harper, which I think is a really interesting thing. There's also a scene where they plead with her, and listen, I get a little emotional thinking about it, because, I'll talk about that a little bit more later. As in, like, put a pin in that. Put a pin in the idea of, like, Harper and PAMA's relationship. But going off of this characterization, PAMA has a lot of fondness for Harper and maybe even respects her opinion more than anyone else's. This is also something I see contradicted by, like, the pure evil villain wiki that says PAMA sees themselves as superior to humanity or something, when in reality, PAMA is, like, pretty complacent when it comes to Harper. Like, yes, they specifically chip her, but they, like, they're going after her, but they seem to, like, have a little bit more respect for her. It's just an interesting little tidbit. Like, yeah, they're still gonna shove her in the chipping machine no matter what, but they talk to her. They try to have a dialogue with her, which implies that PAMA, has a character outside of the whole useful thing. Now, my crazy conspiracy theory is PAMA specifically a very, not touch-starved, but, like, very conversation-starved individual. Because, they're basically living in a self-contained wasteland, like accidental self-exile, barring, like, Harper, who occasionally runs across the desert, and it's not like they're gonna have a dialogue with her. You are alien to her. Like, you and your little gang, as the protagonist, come in, and you're alien to them. And, like, yeah, PAMA could just shove a chip in your brain, but, like, this implies, like, a character to them, is they want a conversation. But they go back into business. Now, you could interpret this next bit two ways. Either you can interpret PAMA as a manipulative individual who recognizes chipping as painful, equivalent to, like, a flu shot. Like getting vaccinated. Like, if doctor understands it's gonna hurt a little kid to get vaccinated, and then, still do it anyway because it's for their greater good. Or you could recognize this as PAMA basically forcing the protagonist into a conversation because that's actually what they want, but are too caught up in their job. You could even, like, technically say that Sturpay's work, Sturpay's posts on Tumblr defend this in a way, saying that PAMA's job got away from them. Which I think is really interesting if you think of it that way. I think it's more tragic if you view PAMA as this person who would want to do other things but is almost stuck in its own mindset. Which technically means that you could have actually had common ground with them if you managed to build onto that. Obviously, it's really hard to get someone out of that mindset. When it comes to other characterization, it seems like PAMA doesn't use violence unless absolutely necessary, and seems to be usually friendly, and prefers to incapacitate someone instead of killing them. For example, when they, knock you out stone cold. That's because they, just wanted to, like, grab you, take you where you wanted to be, and there you go. I mean, take you where they wanted you to be. You don't want to go here. Ain't nobody want to go to the chipping machine. So, besides that, PAMA has a very friendly, curious demeanor, unless you don't cooperate. Which again, PAMA just seems like someone who's really all business, but also is kind of the equivalent of being, shoved into a role by your mom and you can't really do anything. PAMA's a weird nepotism baby. Kind of. That's also something I want to talk about. Harper accidentally doomed all of Crown Mesa. Now, I don't want to pin this on her, because, part of her character arc is, well, not her character arc, but, part of the tragic backstory of her is, oh, I'm miserable and I feel guilty because PAMA was my fault, but it's also not my fault. And I'm not gonna blame her for PAMA's actions, because, the only thing she did was roll the stone, and very well PAMA could have just been doing what it was intended to do, and it would have just been miserable. Or, would have actually been happy. Who knows what PAMA would have done? Maybe PAMA would have gotten bored and wanted to go to college. But, by Harper making something, giving something life, giving something the ability to determine things and have, opinions, and then also giving it a very specific job, she accidentally set in motion things. This is even, more tragic considering the fact that, canonically, children don't exist. And if you follow Stirpe's logic, nobody ever knows what a kid is. You just kind of pop into existence and that's that. So, Harper has no frame of reference for how to deal with a child. And accidentally teaches a child how to be a dictator. And tells them that that's their worth. That is their purpose. This is what PAMA believes themselves to be built for. They back this up. This is why you made me. I mean, that is why you made me. This is the equivalent of having, God come down from the heavens and create the first person and tell that guy, you need to be a lawyer. And then that guy lawyers so hard the apocalypse happens, and then you get upset at the lawyer man for being a lawyer too hard. How was he supposed to know anything else? How were you supposed to know anything else? You have no freaking frame of reference. Nobody in this situation has a frame of reference for anything. Therefore, tragedy ensues. PAMA was doomed the moment they were born. And I also understand why Harper wouldn't want to just test everything to an algorithm. It probably would have done the same thing PAMA did, except probably a lot more efficiently. It wouldn't have wasted time talking to people. It would have just shoved them into the hive mind immediately. It wouldn't have cared. It would have just progressed. So, Harper is technically a little bit at fault. I don't see her as evil for it, and I can't blame her for making this mistake. It's just technically, she set these things in motion. PAMA did what it was asked of. And it doesn't mean that PAMA was completely and utterly without autonomy. Nobody ever told PAMA that they had to chip people, just mobs. But, things happened. And that's tragic. I think it's, genuinely, it's something that would be a Greek tragedy if it was if it was in any other piece of media. PAMA's tale would be, the equivalent of, a tragic, self-fulfilling prophecy. People would probably read that and cry about it because everybody was doing their best and it still ended up messing it up anyway. PAMA's a good example of tragedy, and that's something people don't get when they reduce PAMA to evil. They don't see the tragedy. They don't see the awful human and inhuman parts that intersect. They don't see it. They don't see the layers, and I think that's so sad. I have been yammering way too long. So, redemption for PAMA is, the most interesting thing for me. Because, I don't see a redemption arc that would happen in Crown Mesa. Oh my god, I went on a redemption tangent and I never finished it. So, the redemption tangent. PAMA wouldn't have gotten a really interesting redemption arc. They probably would have just been oh, you made PAMA small and mobile. Well, tell it to get out of Crown Mesa. Or, hell, they could have actually just made it as easy as Harper's thing, and it would have been just PAMA being depowered like Romeo, and would have just been I understand the consequences of my actions. Now that I am tiny and cannot hurt anyone. Yay! Everybody accepts me, and, you know, I have to make things up somehow. Uh, Yay! Free taxes for everyone. I'll do everyone's taxes. That's how I serve the community. You know, the part where it makes sense why this stuff would be resolved a lot quicker, because she wasn't the one who put chips in people's heads. That was PAMA. But, like, I imagine, like, a realistic redemption arc would have just been, you get baby PAMA, baby PAMA's, baby PAMA, okay, not baby. I would always imagine, like, if you were to redeem PAMA, it would just be, like, you immediately, like, shove them back into that smaller vessel somehow, and they're just tiny. You get a little pocket PAMA. You get a little Pamagotchi, if you will. So, you got teeny itty bitty PAMA, and you take them and you basically kidnap them, take them away from their home, and they cry a little river about it. And they probably would have just been like, I'm now a good person. I now am the good person. Because, writing an actual redemption arc takes way too much budget. This is, of course, assuming that we wouldn't go with the worst option and just be like, I'm large, PAMA, and I've suddenly decided to recognize you, protagonist, as the right person with the right opinions. I have now decided to let everyone go. And then everybody's like, yay, PAMA! Yay, we love you! That would have been the worst ever. Because that's not how it reasonably would have gone. And you would have had, like, a teeny, but, the most realistic thing, I think, would have just been, you grab baby PAMA, or, I don't know, maybe they just make big PAMA do chores for everyone. So you get baby PAMA, not baby PAMA, not baby PAMA, tiny PAMA, and you take them to episode 8, and I guess you just have them. Or maybe they just decide to be like, I'm gonna be helpful now. I've just decided to join Team Good Guy. And they probably wouldn't have been like a home run like Ivor was, so they would have just been like a worse Ivor. We probably wouldn't. I don't want to talk about my own fanfic, but we probably wouldn't have gotten any interesting character interactions. PAMA would have probably just been written off the moment season 2 began. It probably would have been just like, one line about Harper taking PAMA to, I don't know, the beach. Harper took PAMA on a beach vacation. PAMA would have just, where all the story mode characters, when they're too inconvenient to write anymore, they go to the farm. They're just on the farm now. PAMA's on the farm, Harper's on the farm, they're all on the farm. So, but I think, like, PAMA's redemption arc, if actually written, could be so interesting. Because what makes PAMA a villain is the fundamental parts of them. Having their purpose and everything suddenly stripped of them, and being captured by people who were, like, a moment ago being like, oh my god, PAMA, you need to explode and die violently? And then getting taken to, like, the old Builder games, and then also having Harper's memory and being like, oh god, I know these people. These are the toxic in-laws. Ugh. There's a lot of interesting character interactions. I guess you could have some comedy with PAMA, like, telling everyone about the old Builder drama, but, like, most of what makes PAMA interesting in the redemption arc aspect is, this is a total overhaul of their identity. It's in essence an entire overhaul of their being. They have to deal with the fact that their very fundamental actions, fundamental parts of their personality and purpose, hurt people, and now they can never go home for it. Now now their memory haunts their mom, and now they have to deal with that. And that's such an interesting, tragic arc. Imagine trying to help people, and all you get out of it is so many people's lives broken in a home you can never return to. That's so fundamentally interesting. That's so cool. That's such an interesting thing to explore. PAMA burning all these bridges without knowing that they're the equivalent of, like, PAMA doesn't realize they're a phoenix drenched in gasoline, and they don't realize they're burning the bridges until they sit in the smoldering wreckage. That's so interesting. Like, we could have had PAMA grapple with their identity. What are they without their function? How do they deal with it? How does PAMA deal with any of this? Even if they, like, get over it and decide, I give up on the whole usefulness thing, I'll be my own person. PAMA's probably gonna deal with, like, the equivalent of, like, lingering guilt, like, yeah, I should be doing useful things. assuming that the lingering guilt is just for being like, I need to do a useful, and not, oh god, I need to repent every day for what I've done. Like, there's so many interesting ways you could take their character. And it's just a shame. It's a shame. It's squandered. Especially, like, the interactions they could have had with Harper. And them having to work out their relationship. Like, it could have been like, I never want to talk to you. I want to go no contact with you, my child. I disown you. Or it could have been, we'll find a way to deal with this. I will forgive you, eventually. Or PAMA being like, I can't do this. Or what if PAMA resented Harper? Or maybe they both equally resent each other. Like, there's so many ways this could have gone. And it could have been so interesting. And so PAMA's interactions with other characters. Like, Olivia's like, I wish I could have seen PAMA. Well, what if she saw baby PAMA? I keep calling it baby PAMA. It's not baby PAMA. PAMA it turned into a baby. They get turned tiny. Well, what if she saw a tiny computer? And then, that could also be introspection for PAMA. It's like, yes, you're so evil, PAMA. But I covered this in my fanfic. I don't want to talk about my fanfic. But, like, I covered this in my ass blog. It's like in the prologue. I have like Olivia come over to PAMA and it's like, you're evil, but I'm so glad I met you. And PAMA's like, evil? I'm evil? I'm the Joker? I cannot believe she said I was in my villain era. Can you believe this, Jessie? Yeah, I can. You never defend me. Wah! Like, there's so many interesting things that could be dealt with. PAMA grappling with their identity after their redemption arc. Like, this could also be interesting in Season 2 especially. Like, PAMA and Jessie having to develop a relationship. Like, depending on how you would have played it. Like, I want to see, like, PAMA becoming amicable, or hating Jessie, or whatever. Or like, not hating Jessie, and understanding why the protagonist hates them. I want to see all the opinions they could have had. What is PAMA's, like, first thought that they allowed themselves to have that's, like, independent of their whole function thing? Does PAMA think about how, like, kittens are overrated or something? Who would PAMA become without all of this stuff? I want to see what they would do. I also think them and Radar would have, like, the best chemistry. Like, come on, let's think about it. Nerd boy who's like, I gotta do the routines, I gotta plan the things. I've got autism, I've got anxiety. I love it when things are organized. Meets a computer who's basically like, I'm Super Sorter 90 fat. I am Super Sorter 9000. Hello. Best game. They basically would be not hyperfixate, info dumping on each other constantly. I would love to see their dynamic. They would have such a good dynamic. Like, they would work together so well, and it's so upsetting that they never meet. It's also really funny to imagine them both being like, God. I'm not gonna finish that sentence. I just think them dating would be really funny. Like, if any two characters are gonna be, like, the weirdest, like, crack ship turned serious, it's gonna be them. Like, they would have, like, good chemistry, whether it be friendship or romantic. It'd be so funny watching the, two goofy idiots fall... Like, not two goofy idiots. Like, finding, like, PAMA who's, like, this weirdly, like, childish yet extremely intellectual person fall in love with little nerd boy. It's so funny to me, okay? I think it's really funny. I think it could also be cute, but I think it's also really funny. But again, they could work as friends, they could work as, like, acquaintances, they could work really... I think they would have a good dynamic, okay? Like, do you understand? Because, like, I know people could understand, it's just really hard to explain. Seeing them interact with other things, other people, I just want to see that happen. Especially with Season 2 dealing with, like, finding yourself as your friends drift apart. Like, could you imagine being PAMA and being like, yes, Jessie is now my friend, and then Jessie's like, responsibility time, and PAMA's like, oh my fucking god. So, nothing quite like being PAMA in the middle of the friendship rift. Like, that would be so interesting. Like, exploring PAMA as a character, and then, they discover who they are, and then everything just goes to hell. That'd be so interesting. There's just so much that could be done with the redemption arc. Even if PAMA was at the end of the redemption arc reduced to, like, the silly goofy guy or the childish character, it would still be interesting to see how they get there. I don't think I have any more points about repeating myself. Like, I've already talked about how the pewter would have such interesting identity struggles. Like, imagine just having absolutely no identity besides your job, and then, being forcefully fired and being told, find your own purpose! Just don't hurt anyone! Could you imagine having to relive that? I can't. And that's why I think they would be so interesting in, like, a vacuum. Like, there's so much you could explore. It's so sad that it never gets explored, but I can. I can explore it. I'll write a dumb, goofy fanfic about, I don't know, PAMA being an angsty teenager for 50,000 chapters. This is... Oh my god, a half hour? Okay. This is like a condensed version of my thoughts. You can't handle me at my PAMA. The end.